Amen. Amen. So as I mentioned, I'll wait. So as I mentioned, it sounds, yeah. God bless if anyone was listening at home and I just blew out their speakers. So as I mentioned this morning, our theme from camp this week was about answering the call of God. And while predominantly at camp we looked at 1 Samuel chapter 3 about the actual call of Samuel, I was wanting to study that, but in studying chapter 3, it just felt impossible to go to 3 without going back to 1. And so we're not even going to get to chapter 3. We're just going to look at the first 20 verses of 1 Samuel. And in doing so, we got a couple points to look at together. I've got some questions written out. We're going to go just section by section. We're not going to try to eat the whole elephant at once. I brought this out. Might not even use it. If this is in somebody's way, just let me know. But we start in just the first 3 verses in 1 Samuel chapter 1, 1 through 3. Now there was a certain man over Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. What you gain from that verse, essentially in the long and short of it, is this. He was a Levite. Now, bonus points for anyone in at home, what were so special about the Levites? Right. They were the ones associated with the priesthood. They were the only ones, good use. They were the priests. They were the only ones able to handle the ark, the only ones that moved the tabernacle. That was a select group of the Israelites. Now, it does not indicate that he was a priest, but he is of that family. And that makes an interesting point. And he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the other one was Peninnah, and that is one of my least favorite names to say, because I stumble over it every time. I usually end up just saying Penny. So if that comes out, you know who I'm talking about. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh, fulfilling multiple laws that we see in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. This seems to indicate that Elkanah was a faithful Israelite. He was a faithful Levite. He went as he was commanded to do in the law annually to make these sacrifices. And the 2 sons of Eli, the priest, Hophni and Phinehas, the priest of the Lord, were there. So this first 3 verses gets a lot of setup about what we're going to study and who we're going to study. It gives the main people that this passage is about. It introduces to Elkanah, a Levite, his 2 wives, Hannah and Penny, and then the priests that are involved with this, Eli and his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas. So we just got this handful of people that we need to know as this book and as this chapter starts. But while this passage serves as an introduction to the people involved in this account, it also sets forth a biblical pattern. And it may be a little bit harder to detect. We're going to go over it. We've already talked about what the unique role of the tribe of Levi was in the kingdom of Israel, but there's a couple biblical patterns that we can see in this first few verses. Anyone want to take a stab at maybe what those patterns were? Yep. We have 2 wives. One was barren. One was fruitful. Okay. One was barren, one was fruitful. Where have we seen that before? Abraham. Huh? Jacob. Who were these people involved with? I mean, that's such a silly question, but were Abraham and Jacob kind of important to the Old Testament?
No, not at all.
Yeah, they're like 2 of the most prominent figures in all of Genesis. And we see the same pattern, a barren wife and a fruitful wife. And we're seeing it again here. You have Hannah and Peninnah being barren and fruitful. What were the barrenness and fruitfulness a representation of? I'll give you a hint by giving you one. You should be able to figure out the other. So this would be life. Yeah. So this fruitfulness, this representation of life, there is propagation, there is that fulfillment of the first commandment, right? Be fruitful and multiply. Here we see what is seen as the blessing of motherhood on Peninnah. She can have children. She can beget life. It seems like there is this honor that she has that Hannah does not have. She is barren. There is no life in her womb. There is no way for her to bring forth. There is no way to fulfill that commandment in her. And regardless of whether it was true or not, there was this perception of righteous and unrighteous. Can follow, cannot follow. Okay? But if we remember some of those examples already, Abraham, Jacob, what did we see happen in this scenario time and time again? When it was time they had brought forth life. That the barren didn't remain that way. And that is a subversion of expectation. Any of those times happen, God is taking what shouldn't be and turning it into what should be, right? And that's the same thing about our sin nature. We shouldn't be born with the nature of sin, right? That's not how God created humanity. We should not be born with this death nail hanging around us. We should not be born with a death sentence. Yet, because of sin nature, because of the sin that Adam committed, read the book of Romans, right, chapter 5, we're all born with sinfulness. We're all born with that punishment of sin about us. And God desires to subvert that and bring in life where death once was. And now we're going to see that play out here. Because they were well aware of it, and there was a reason that Hannah was found to be weeping. So following this introduction to the people, we learn more of the problem. When the time was come, in verse 4, that Elkanah went to make his offering, he gave to Peninnah, his wife, and to her sons and her daughters, so at least 4 children, right? That's how math works. Portions, certain amounts to make those offerings. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. And now it begins to give details that it doesn't fully explain. And her adversary also provoked her sorely, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Now this word adversary, that's a very big word. I'm not talking about the length of the actual word itself. Where do we see this adversary elsewhere? Well, let me ask this question differently. Who else is often referred to as the adversary? Satan. And here it says, and her adversary also provoked her egregiously, sorely, to make her fret because the Lord had shut up her womb. Okay? Now here's the thing. At this point, if you're reading this for the first time, you don't know who her adversary is until you keep reading. And as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Begins to reveal that identity. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why are you weeping, essentially? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So it begins to reveal that, one, Peninnah was her adversary. She provoked her every time they went up. Because while she was given portions, who was given the worthy portion? Hannah, because she was loved. Now, we've already given the answer. who else did we see that was more beloved of the two, even though that she was barren? Not the one I was going with, but yeah. Rachel versus Leah. We saw the same pattern in Rachel and Leah. Rachel couldn't have kids, Leah could. She had 4, and Rachel didn't have any. Leah finally decided, I'm just going to worship the Lord anyway. Rachel remained barren until she finally brought forth a child. We're seeing the same thing. And now it's weird that we're seeing this parallel. While Leah was the one bringing forth children, while Penny was the one bringing forth children, the scriptures made it clear the husband of each, respectfully, loved the barren one more. And that says something maybe about their righteousness, maybe says something about their relationship. It showcases they were viewing their spouse more than just the means to an end. Does that make sense? You're not just the, what?
Same as Sarah and Hagar.
Right. It wasn't just that I'm using you to make sure I have children. They were still loved even though they weren't able to have children. And that brings out, like I said, another one of those connections. But in reading this passage, notice even how Elkanah at the end, he understood that she was grieving, but it didn't really click for him, did it? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? That's a strong statement. Now, clearly he loved her. Clearly she loved him. But he was not recognizing the reason of her grief. And that created more issues. But I want to ask one other question before we move on. Was there something that stood out to you in this passage? Because I've got a couple things here. I want to see what you thought, though. You can go back and reread it real quick. Anything stand out to any of y'all in this passage?
Literally says the Lord closed her womb.
Right. He was the one twice that was recorded as responsible. It was the Lord that closed her womb. Now, oh man, I didn't get this verse pulled up. Do y'all remember in the life of Jesus when he and the disciples came across a blind man? And the disciples' response was, who sinned? Him or his parents that he was born blind? They saw this infirm man and said, hey, sin must be the cause. There's a whole book written about that exact thing. Remember the book of Job? His 3 friends showed up and after a week said, what did you do wrong, man? Like you must have done something. You made God really angry at you. What is it that you did? Because you must have done something for God to reciprocate in such a way. Now, in, like I said, the gospel, when they came across that man, they said, who sinned? Him or his parents that he was born blind? Thank you. John 9, 2-3. Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born in this condition? And then Jesus' response was what? Neither. Neither. But what was the reason? That the works of God should be made manifest in him. He said he was born not because of sin, but by opportunity. And Scripture said in a different passage, time and chance happens to all men. Now, there are things that happen just because that is how God allows it. Here he says, this is an opportunity, though, not for you to accuse of sin, but so that you can see the glory of the Lord. So that you can see the beauty of what God has planned. The Lord shut up her womb for the opportunity for them to see the Lord's glory. I found that interesting too. Anybody else?
I also think it says something about how God values marriage versus how we value marriage. Because even with Jacob, I don't know who was he married to. Who was the first wife in this?
He tried to marry Rachel,
Yeah,
tricked into marrying Leah, still married Rachel.
with Peninnah, whatever. And
Yeah.
Hannah. Which one was first?
Yeah, I was going to say, it actually doesn't say. It just says he had. Now, there's the speculation he married Hannah first because she's listed first. And that is the only reason why we have that speculation. But no, the Bible does not clearly say who he married first.
Well, then at least in the Jacob and Rachel and Leah example, he marries, even though he wants to marry Rachel first, he marries Leah first. And it seems that, like, God is, to me, it's like, God is blessing this marriage because that is what the marriage is. Despite what you want,
Right,
this is how it's supposed to work.
right,
But then he's like, okay, I'll work with this too.
right. And it goes back to the subversion of expectation. We could ask a real good question. Should Jacob have just been satisfied with Leah and stopped pursuing Rachel?
Jacob literally served 14 years in slavery for Rachel. Okay, and this said that she went year by year. So, I mean, she was very faithful.
She was just as faithful as Elkanah,
Jacob was too, to his desire to marry Rachel.
year by year.
Year by year, he served slavery so he could be her husband.
But should he have just been satisfied with Leah?
No. Well, I mean, he wanted Rachel, so you better not.
That's a whole different conversation. I'm not planning to have.
Soap opera is amazing.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's just I don't understand how people like soap operas but don't like the Bible. There's drama everywhere. Elkanah loved Hannah the barren, but showed less favor to Penny the fruitful. And this is something that stood out to me. Peninnah held her blessing over Hannah's head. Look at me, I have kids, you don't, ha ha ha. Also, psychopath behavior. Like, why would you? That's horrible. Horrible actions. But Hannah did not reciprocate by saying, yes, but Elkanah loves me more. She didn't show back that same belligerence and that same wickedness. And then lastly, like I said, Elkanah heard the weeping of Hannah, but he didn't understand it. And that is an important factor for later. Anything else? Like I said, this really sets up the problem that we're going to face as we go through the sorrow and joy of Hannah and the rest of this chapter. If not, we will continue in our verses, picking back up in verse 9. So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh. So, as already indicates, it's time for the offering. They've journeyed to Shiloh, right? They stopped, they ate, and after they had drunk. Now, that's an important little bitty word that they threw in there. They ate, they drank. What did they drink? Yeah, did they have a big old glass of Powerade? No. So when they did that, to use some good biblical language, what happened after this happened?
She gets accused of being drunk.
Well, yeah, but the other verses in my mind, it made them merry in their heart. Like that's how the Bible explains that in other places. They drank their wine and afterwards were a little bit chipper. Merry in their heart, yeah. Not maybe fully drunk, but just, yeah. That's about the best word for it. So yeah, this is important. Now Eli the priest sat upon the seat by the post of the temple of the Lord. So he was like the gatekeeper at the time. And she was in bitterness of soul. Well, wait a minute. We just said that she's going to be merry. She's weeping. And she prayed to the Lord and wept sorely. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your handmaid. Now that's, again, an important phrasing. She's identifying herself with the Lord. I am your handmaid. I am your person. You are mine, I am yours, right? If you will indeed look upon my affliction and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thy handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it shall come to pass and it came to pass as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli marked her mouth. That means he just paid attention to her and her mouth. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, but only her lips moved. Her voice was not heard. So she was praying silently in her own heart. Her mouth was moving, but she wasn't making any sounds. Therefore, Eli thought she had been drunken, which there was reason to believe. Right? This is an important part for us as believers. Eli said to her, how long will you be drunken? Put away your wine from thee. In other words, go sober up and come back. You're making a fool out of yourself. You're making a mockery out of yourself. You're out here on your face before the Lord, weeping like a fool, and you're praying. So you say, like, you're making a fool of yourself. Hannah answered, though, and said, no, my Lord. I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink. Oh, okay, so after they had drunk, she said, no, others may have, but I didn't. Now, fast forward, day of Pentecost, Peter and the other apostles start speaking in tongues, and what are they accused of? Well, they're drunk. And he said, it is literally too early for that to even be a possibility. It's too early. We have not even had anything. We're not able to be. He said, that's a false accusation. Here she said, that's impossible. That's a false accusation. Later on, we see the same language being used again of these people who were accused of this drunken state, but they said it's literally impossible. She said, I'm not drunk, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Count not your handmaid for a daughter of Belial. She just essentially shot him down and said, I'm not no idol worshiper. I'm not a paganist. I trust the Lord. For out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. So she defended, and what I wrote down here, this is the pure conviction of a true believer. She would not be mistaken for a non-believer. She wanted to make it clear where her convictions lie and how she was not a part of this world that she was being accused of. She said, you called me drunk. That's impossible. I have not touched anything. You've called me a pagan. That's impossible. I'm on my face before the temple of God praying to the Lord and not to Belial. I love how she named the idol. She said, I'm not a daughter of Belial. I'm not a part of this cult. I'm not a part of this pagan religion. I don't serve idols. I serve the Lord. And I'm enjoying that conviction of a woman essentially thrown on the seat of judgment. He said, depart from your drunkenness, depart from that state of mind, stop acting like one of these paganesses. And she said, that's no problem for me, because I'm not. Eli answered and said, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant you your petition that you have asked of him. So her sorrow was brought out of a pure desire to have a child. Why would she not want a child? She sees, the other wife of her husband having children. She is mocked yearly for not having children. She wants to fulfill the role of a wife and have children. And yet, as we've already seen, the Lord was at work in this. What's beautiful in this passage is what she didn't do. Can anyone pick up on that? What's something that she didn't do in this passage?
She never retaliated.
She never retaliated, no.
She didn't do what the other women did. She didn't go get somebody else to get pregnant by her husband.
That is very true. She didn't follow the other biblical example. Thankfully, she didn't follow the other biblical example of all those previous women who were buried and said, well, I got a handmaid that can just take care of the job. She didn't go find a surrogate. That's very true. Anything else?
She just prayed in her sorrow. She just asked God. She surrendered herself and said, God, what I mean?
She sought the Lord and essentially said, Lord, if it is your will, then be so. But in doing so as well, she never blamed the Lord. She never went and said, God, this is your fault. God, you are why I can't have children. God, you are why I'm mocked daily. You are the why. Never said that. And to me, like I said, we see her going every year. We see her not retaliating. We see her praying. We see her abstaining from things that would bring accusation against her. We see a very faithful woman. And I see the outcome of this, which at this point you can guess. In 1 Samuel, verse 18. And she said, after Eli spoke to her, this is going to be fun in a second. Let thy handmaid find grace in your sight. So here she was. She prayed, right? Note the order. Okay. Notice the order of these events. Verse 17, or prior to that, she was praying. In verse 17, the priest said, "Oh, my bad, I greatly mistook what happened. Go in peace." Essentially, co-signing the desire that she had. Go in peace, may the Lord do to you as you've asked. Big vow that she asked, give me a child and I'll give him a robe. He co-signed, he agreed, God, let this woman's prayers be answered. She said, let me find grace in your sight. So she went away and did eat. I'll write that down because we got another parallel coming up in a second. Did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. And they rose up in the morning early and worshiped before the Lord and returned home. She prayed. The priest said, so be it. She rose up. She ate. She was no longer sad. And she worshiped. Has she received the promise yet? No. She doesn't know anything about the future. She doesn't know what's going to happen. She doesn't know if God's going to bless, if God's going to continue to seal her womb. Yet, what is her response? Pure trust. Literally says, not sad. She took joy in the Lord, even though the Lord had not blessed her yet. She worshiped without even a moment of idea that God would fulfill or not. This is a hard challenge to us as believers. You know, we want to praise the Lord when he does something good. She was praising the Lord when God had done nothing at all. She said, I came and sought the Lord by prayer. I poured out my heart before him. But even if the child never comes, even if, and now we swap to our scenarios, and there's a beautiful song, even if the healing does not come, he is still worthy to be worshiped. And that's the testimony that she had. She had no absolute hope. She had no absolute promise. She had a prayer and an encouragement by the priest. And she rose up, she ate, she was no longer sad, and she worshiped the Lord. Now, we keep using this phrase, it's a subversion of expectation. You would think all of this would happen after she got the news she was going to have a child. You think all of this would happen, and by the way, chapter 2, you see that it does happen again. Chapter 2 is a beautiful prayer of Hannah. She does worship. She is no longer sad once the child is there. But this is before. This idea of God takes what is expected and turns it on his head has also been seen later on. Because does anyone recognize this about a child? Something happening where it involves a person no longer being sad and eating when they shouldn't have. This one's a bit harder of a deep dive. David. And while Bathsheba was still married to Uriah, and David lay with her, and she became with child, Nathan the prophet showed up and knocked on his door and said, I've got some troubling news for you. God knows. No one else might, but God knows. And the child will die. Once the child was born, for 7 days, David did not eat, and he wept before the face of the Lord, praying, God, forgive me and spare the life of the child. 7 days later, the child passes. David rises up, he washes his face, and he begins to eat. And all of his servants are like, David, you confused us. For 7 days, while the child was alive, you wept and you cried. Because that may be the sign that they didn't know what Nathan said. All they saw was a child be born, and David began to fast and pray and weep and go, God, please, God, please, God, please. And now the child passes, and he rises up, he's eaten, and he's no longer sad. And they're like, David, you have confused us. What is the deal? And he said in response, I sought the Lord in prayer for 7 days, not knowing if the child would live or not. But now that the child's passed, the future is secure. He's not going to be here with me, but one day I will go to be where he is. The future is secure. So we see this being planted, this same imagery where she did not know the future of her child. David did not know the future of his child. And when it shouldn't have been happening, it was. When she shouldn't have been eating, she should have still been praying, right? She should have still been on her face. She didn't know what was going to happen. She said, no. I've given it to the Lord, so it's the Lord's now. And I will walk on worshiping him, because whether I have a child or not, that's no longer up to me. It is solely up to God, and I will worship him because he is worthy of the worship. There are days we don't walk in the shadow of these people. I pray we do, where we're able to worship the Lord no matter what, because we've gone to him and said, God, I'm turning over everything. I'm praying and I'm laying it all at your feet. I'm turning it over to you. If you will, then so be it. But if not, so be it. We've prayed. We've put the matter to rest. We rise up. We eat. We no longer are sad, and we worship. Like, it's just entire image, entire idea. But it does continue. Elkanah knew his wife at the end of verse 19, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, she bare a son, and she called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. So we see the fulfillment. And like I said, chapter 2 is her praying and celebrating what God has done. Chapter 3, we see how she gives the child back to the Lord, just as she says here in chapter 1, where she said, I vowed a vow, if you give him to me, I will give him back to you. Chapter 3 is about that, but one thing before we come to any kind of conclusion, does anyone remember how names in the Old Testament were kind of important? Like, does anyone remember what Jacob's name meant? Trickster. I want you to think of a Jacob you know. Does that seem to fit? Oh, man. Yeah. I'm not saying it's prophetic by every one of them, but I just thought it was funny that about every Jacob I knew was like, yeah, you know what? That's pretty accurate. The names were important, right? I want to share this with you. I'm not going to write them all out. Elkanah, Hannah, Samuel, right? What is the testimony of their family? Just say their names. Elkanah is God has possessed. Hannah means grace, which is fantastic because, like we said back in verse 18, she said, let your handmaid find grace in your sight. And then Samuel's name, she said it there because he has listened. Their family testimony is because God has possessed grace, or God has possessed grace because he has listened. And we see that through the exact existence of Samuel. Only because God chose grace did Samuel exist. And only because, remember how it said there in the verse, the Lord remembered Hannah when Elkanah lay with her. The Lord remembered Hannah. He remembered the prayer that she spoke. Because he listened to her, there was grace. And I found that to be really beautiful because, again, these names were not given arbitrarily. And we saw that in this passage in verse 20. Called his name Samuel because I have asked him of the Lord. And when you translate it out directly, Samuel means because God has listened. And so the testimony of this family was that God shows grace to those who call upon him. God shows grace when we earnestly beseech him. Now, you say, what about the other people, how they factor into it? That wasn't this family's testimony. That wasn't the testimony of Samuel. This does not work one-to-one every time. You can't go look at every family and be like, well, there's going to be a sentence somewhere. No, but there is purpose behind these names. There's purpose behind this lineage and this anthology of people. And I found that one to be rather interesting. So, what does this mean for us? How does knowing this passage and the birth of Samuel affect us? Give it to God and let it go. All right, I like that. That's a poster. I'm not. That's sincere. Anybody else?
Something that's always like hard for me to grasp with this is how she wanted a kid so bad that she cried out to God for it, and then as soon as he got here, she gave him away. She didn't have a kid anymore. The kid don't live with her. The kid's being raised by someone else, not even by her. That's really hard.
I would say impossible.
Let's see. Let me make sure of something before I. I cannot remember if she had other children afterwards, but I thought she did. Okay. I was just looking for the verse. Do you know where it is? Let's see.
She had 3 sons and 2 daughters.
It was the next verse and I skipped it? No. 2:21?
What chapter?
Oh, okay. 2:20. The Lord visited Hannah, so she conceived and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters, and the child. Yeah. So not to detract from the hardness of donating your child to the Lord, and like you said, he grows up in another man's household, which you see that in chapter 3. The faithfulness of her faith brought more blessings, and we see she still would go visit him, because if he was being raised in the household of a priest, they're going there annually. Does it make it easier? No, but does it make it slightly more understandable that she still saw him?
She made him a robe every year and took it to him.
Probably a little Christmas card too. But yeah, it does show again her faith, because she does that. She gives him to be raised in the household of the priest, essentially saying yeah, here it is. I'm fulfilling my vow. And maybe because she just has this sounds crazy, but maybe she just has the spiritual common sense of I only have him because of the Lord. How dare I try to keep him from it? Because it's already been proven that God listens and God does. And if he is given this child to me, he certainly is able to take this child from me if I do not fulfill my vow. That's not said, but I can only imagine.
But also, I would assume that she wouldn't know that she's going to have 5 more kids.
Right.
So she's so desperate for a child. It's almost for me, if I was in that position, I'd be well, either never have a child or have a child then have to give it up.
What's worse?
Promise to give it up before I even get it. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, because it's like you said, it's as if she never had the child to begin with, but it's almost like it's the breaking of that curse. She sees the veil has now been taken. God did listen. Something that we've said recently, just in terms of things recently heard of a person who passed away, and the spouse was in the room, and when the person passed, the spouse came out of the hospital room rejoicing and praising the Lord, because that time and that trial is over. And the idea is, regardless of what happens now, their immediate response was to glorify the Lord. And that testimony is sealed, that even if now they're weeping and bitter, what happened in that moment is always and forever will be what happened in that moment. And when she received that child, what was her response? to give that child back to the Lord, because she knew, well, there was no promise, there was no security. And it just teaches us of what faithfulness really should look like. Yes, I can't imagine how hard that must be, nor do I even dare want to try.
But what greater honor is it for a mother to give her child to the Lord if that relationship like it is?
And rightly so, because if anything, we know Elkanah is the father. But if anything, she said, I'm going to make sure my child is raised in his father's house.
Like you said, the honor, who her child turned out to be.
But one of the greatest men in all of the scriptures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because of her faithfulness, not the deceit that Jacob's mom had.
Right.
And all this, and he had a beautiful, beautiful story.
Right.
And an impact on
Samuel is so underrated.
The impact he had on eternity.
Mm-hmm.
So that is really because of her faithfulness, she was rewarded for giving him up.
Right. Absolutely. But like you said, she didn't know that in that moment.
Oh no.
Yeah, that is that test of faith that we see where she was willing, even though she had no assurance.
I think we see her knowledge too of, especially the Torah and her prayer. But
Yeah.
go back to Deuteronomy, where God talks about how the firstborn is mine, and then
Yeah.
talks about it in Leviticus.
Deuteronomy 24,
It's almost like we can see that she
I think.
was very familiar with the law,
Mhm.
and so it's like, God, if you give this to me, I'm giving you the first fruits back.
Right.
I'm giving you the firstborn back because you have fulfilled that promise, just like the law. And with them being in the Levite tribe, that was the case for priests. That's what they were supposed to do, is give the firstborn
Mhm.
for the priesthood.
And now, while Elkanah was not a priest, at least it was never described as he is one,
Right.
Samuel becomes the greatest priest of the Old
So you
Testament.
see, like, it's almost like in the midst of it, because we're coming out of like the previous books where like Israel is not doing what they're supposed to.
Oh, yeah.
That's where First Samuel picks up.
Pure disaster.
is Israel has like started to fall away, and so it starts off with in the beginning of First Samuel. But here's a family that's doing it right.
It's the
And
same image as
and
Noah.
Doing what she's supposed to do. She's giving back that first fruit. She's giving back that first son.
Right. And like you brought it back to Genesis, and we're seeing like Israel is in a state of chaos. And just like the world was in the days of Noah, here is a new Noah in Samuel coming forth to lead back into righteousness, coming forth to bring order back to Israel. And he was a prophet and priest, and he wasn't the king of Israel, but for a time he was the highest human leader in Israel until they said, we want a king like all those other nations. And he's like, you have a king that's better than those other nations. That king is God. They're like, no, we want a person. And even when he goes to the Lord and says, hey, they want a person, he says, well, give it to them. Give them what they want and let them see how bad it is. Have them establish their king and let them see how that goes. We know what happens. Saul rises up. Saul listens to the word of Samuel. Somewhat. He rebels, but for the greater part, he entreats Samuel because he understands Samuel's relationship with God. So even though he wasn't the king, he was the highest advisor to the king, because the king was just scared and knew that Samuel was close to the Lord. So if I know he's close to him, I'm going to go to him. And so he fulfilled this magnitude role that was not fulfilled in any capacity until Jesus, where he perfectly fulfilled those three
I wanted
roles.
to point it out that she didn't just arbitrarily say, if you give me a child.
Oh,
It's
no.
like there was law.
Yeah.
It's just showing us she was actually just following the law.
But to the extent that she was willing to. Yeah. Yeah, and that was the other layer to
Yeah,
this.
she did talk about how he was going to be the Nazarite vow, but not every priest took that vow.
That was just extra priesty.
The firstborn in the Levite tribe was supposed to be given to the priest.
And well, the idea is, though, Elkanah could argue, well, that's one of Penny's sons.
Yeah.
Like, he's my firstborn. He can go. Because we already saw that he had sons by Peninnah. But she said, that doesn't matter to me. Those aren't my kids.
It's that dynamic of
And it's the subversion of expectation. Anything else? We're not going to do it per se, but if you want to have a fun homework assignment, I was going to say go read the book of Deuteronomy, read chapter 2, and then go read Mary's prayer after Jesus is born and compare it to Hannah's prayer in chapter 2. If you don't want to read all of Deuteronomy, at least read those two chapters next to each other when Hannah prays in chapter 2 and when Mary prays, and just have a little game of spot the differences and spot the similarities, and you may be impressed by what you see together. But yeah, if you read Deuteronomy, you'll get the even fuller context. And I'm saying that kind of tongue-in-cheek. I don't expect you to read the entire book of Deuteronomy just to read Hannah's prayer. But there are so many connections in Hannah's prayer to, as Sydney has already said, like the law that was written about the firstborn. But I definitely encourage you to read Hannah's prayer next to Mary's prayer and see those connections. Any other final thought?